I just want to go over something really quick with everybody. Please mute yourself. We're trying something new. We're doing this via Zoom instead of a webinar. So you're going to be online with us, and we'll hear you talking in the background, and you may not know it, and it will disrupt the presentation. So if everybody would mute themselves, and then when we get to the end, we'll just all unmute, and you'll be able to ask Mary and Ron some questions. If you look up into the right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little view up there. It says gallery view. I think it'll be a better experience if you hit that, so you'll see everybody and not just the person who's speaking at one at a time. And then I want to just say that upcoming, we've got Betsy Allison next month. And if anybody's got kids or junior sailors, that's really a presentation you don't want to miss. Betsy's 5 times Rolex Yacht Swim of the Year. She's done some amazing things, and it's one of the advantages of Zoom. She's on the East Coast, she's in Newport, so that we get to have her via Zoom. So that's really kind of cool. And then in April, we've got Randall Reeves, who just won the CCA Blue Water Medal for going around the world. He went around Antarctica and up through the Northwest Passage. So that's really kind of neat. And then in May, we've got the San Francisco Yacht Club Night Watch Award, which is the cruising award this year for a couple. And I'm not allowed to say yet because I don't think it's been announced, but they're going to be doing their talk on their 3-year cruise. And so I'm very excited to have Mary Crowley here and Ron Holland. I'm going to, I'll just say really briefly, I know Mary through the CCA. She's a mover and a shaker in the world. And I'm going to turn it over to our Commodore, Don Jesberg, to introduce them. And Don, I want to say thank you for coming. This is our first speaker series of the year. It's being recorded. It will be on our website, and it'll be available to you, Mary, and to you, Ron, if you want it for other presentations. And with that, everybody mute, and Don, it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Mo. And, you know, we're very excited to kick this year off with this presentation. I hope one of these days we'll actually be able to do presentations in our new Cove House, which may be not too far away now that we're in the red instead of the purple, or whatever that means. And we're back to some indoor dining and other opportunities. But for now, we get to see each other on Zoom. And I'll start with Ron, because I know Ron, it turns out I've known him for 44 years. And I was very, very young at the time. And Ron was only a few years older. And he had come to San Francisco to meet with the Kiskadens, who he had met in New Zealand, to help with a model boat, a little 25-foot schooner that they were experimenting with, wanting to build a bigger one. And he, I think, sailed a race on the Kiskadens boat from Los Angeles to and aboard the boat were some other designers, and he really took the bug and became involved with yacht design at a very early age. I got to know Ron when he designed a boat for one of our San Francisco Yacht Club Commodores, David Allen. David was involved with Commodore Tompkins in a boat called Improbable, and they wanted to race a more serious boat. And Ron, one of his earlier designs, not his first design, I think Dean was your early famous design, turned out to be quite a boat, had a spectacular 3-year career, and did well, not only in the United States, but in England. And I see that Bill Barton is with us, and he was part of that team. And in fact, wrote a book about Imp. And maybe one of these days we'll have you as a speaker again. So we're very excited to hear about your involvement with Mary Crowley, who I've just met. As Mary said, you look familiar, and I said, so do you. She's a Tiburon resident and has her business in Sausalito, and it's called Ocean Voyages Institute. And that is a nonprofit group, and we'll hear all about what they do. I won't try and steal that thunder, but we're just very excited. You'll find out that Ron is one of the great storytellers. And Mary, I'm really looking forward to hearing your message as well. So Mo, thank you for organizing this. Thank you to Ron. Thank you to Mary. And thank you to Grant Crowley, part of the group as well. So will you take it away, please, Mary?
Okay, well, I'd like to say what an honor it is to be speaking to all of you, and we look forward to great questions at the end when our question period. And I'm very honored to have Ron Holland, who is an important part of our ocean cleanup project that Ocean Voyages Institute has. And I think Ron is going to start the first part of the show for us. Or are we watching the video first, or are we starting with the slides?
I think we just slides, right? Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, am I on?
Yes, you want it on my computer.
Sure. So I'm doing kind of an introduction after an introduction. And the introduction I want to say is how I met Mary because of this connection through the Cascaden family. The connection of the ocean, ships sailing, international ocean racing. And for me, I wonder if Cascaden had lived in some boring part of the middle of the States, whether I'd have jumped at the opportunity to come and live with that family. But hey, San Francisco in 1969, you got to say yes. So anyway, this was the luck of starting. Okay, we're going to show the first slide, which is setting the scene here. I'm setting the scene about the Bay Area, me being lucky to be invited here in 1969, about square rig sailing ships, which I was an expert at when I was about 12 years of age. So I love this as a first image for us tonight. It's about San Francisco, it's about the Pacific, and it's about sailing, the oceans. The first reason the Cascadens invited me to San Francisco was to get their 33-foot yacht Spirit ready for the Tahiti race. Hey, you got to say yes. So I came in 69, and 1970, we raced to Tahiti. We were practicing with Spirit on the Bay, and we raced to Tahiti, and here we are at the finish line of Tahiti. Now, Spirit, Mary's done a lot of miles on Spirit. Spirit is 33 feet long, narrow, flush deck, no headroom. And when I arrived in San Francisco, Spirit was a no engine, no nothing boat. We had navigation lights and a battery. And that's about, it was pure sailing vessel. We raced LA to Tahiti. Here we are at the finish line, 23 days. And one of the features of our Spirit race to Tahiti was Cascaden feeling that he really wasn't being invited, particularly in a friendly way, by the Transpacific government. Either the boat was a bit small or he was a bit radical in his social look. He's a beard, kind of a pirate beard-looking guy. Anyway, so there were some new rules that were put in place. Cascaden felt to prevent him racing to Tahiti, but that's a bit extreme. But anyway, let me tell you about this because I think it's part of the fun. And also, if you're in the Bay Area, it's almost sort of your responsibility to know this story. So the CCA didn't want Cascaden's little boat to race, his thinking. So the new rule was you got to have an engine. What? Jesus, they had this boat, Transpac, fast jet race, transatlantic, this little 33-footer, all over the world with no engine. We're going to put a bloody engine in. This is my job, a boat builder from New Zealand. Your first job, Ron, put an engine in. I'm going, what a bloody sacrilege. One of the reasons why I love this whole program was we're going to sail this boat without an engine to Tahiti. and across the Pacific. Anyway, we put an engine in, pretty minimal engine, but we passed the speed restricted rule. There was another one, minimum crew of 6. Oh my God, they've sailed this boat all over the world with 5. Now we've got to have 6. Okay, so George is saying one night at dinner, they really don't want me to do this race. I'll fix them. We'll take 6. We're going to take Johnny, his 8-year-old kid. So the crew plus the 8-year-old did 23 days from LA to Tahiti. Hey, here we are finishing the race. Look at this. What more do you want in life? Drifting across the finish line in Tahiti. But when I say to Johnny Cascade, now, do you remember what it was like? He said, I don't remember anything. It was he blanked out of his conscious. Okay. So now I'm getting closer to home. This is Spaulding Boatyard in Sausalito. And I'm showing this not only because I was lucky enough to hang around here with Myron through the invitation of Tompkins, but I'm showing it because the white ball is a GPS tracking bubble. And it's to do with Mary's idea to try and clean up plastic from the Pacific Ocean. One of the problems of identifying the plastic is finding it again. You know, you can see plastic, but how the hell are you going to find it again? So the idea with this is a tracking system. You throw this, you identify a bunch of plastic. You throw this in, and the GPS transmitter tells you, where the plastic's drifted to. So I like that idea. And this is the result of the GPS tracker, how clearly you can see where a particular geographic area of plastic moves around. And of course you go back, and Mary's going to tell you pretty extreme story of her plan this year for picking up plastic. But it started off with this idea, can you find this stuff after you've seen it? Now, that's just an introduction to how I met Mary. And when I wrote this story, my memoir, I said to her, I'm going to contribute a part of what we sell in this book to your plastic initiative. So there's a connection between my whole story, the San Francisco connection, and Mary's initiative for the plastic. Now, can we keep going? Oh,
I want to say, I don't know how many of the people listening have read Ron's book, but I know amongst a lot of my close friends, we've read the book and then we read it again, or we go back to certain chapters, because Ron is one of the world's best nautical storytellers. And he has led this amazing life where he has sailed with and designed boats for such a wide spectrum of people. So this book has amazing stories. I've gifted it to some friends that aren't really sailors, and they've enjoyed it as much as the sailors, because it not only talks about sailing, but it's all these people. So his books are still available, and if you don't have them, I think you might really enjoy them. I was amazed because Ron stays very busy, still designing boats and refitting boats and sailing in all different areas. And I'm so happy that he put his time into creating this wonderful book. And I'm even more honored that he is helping Ocean Voyages Institute through the book as well.
Thank you, Mary. Well, God, we should have had you as my book salesman a couple of years ago when we started this project. Okay, now I'm being set up here to change slides. How do I change slides? Because we want to keep going. Got to keep the show on the road.
Oh, an interruption.
Oh, here's the interruption. Oh, so the book. Oh, the book. A little bit of money goes to Mary from this book. No money comes to me. But we thought this is fun to show that the story of me coming to San Francisco in 1969 is producing a check for Mary occasionally. Okay, thank you, dancing girls. Okay, now,
Thank you so much.
how do I change channels now here, Holly?
You keep talking.
So the story about if you love sailing, if you love boats, you have to be aware of this plastic situation in the ocean. There's no way around it. It's obvious. Now, most people, of course, never see it. You have to just take our word for it. Or you can be extreme like Mary and sail a little bit like Spirit out into the middle of the Pacific just to see the plastic in the water. That's a pretty dedicated way of saying, is this really a problem? Get out there and see it. Now this is good. This is Mary's introduction of her part of the show, but I want to talk about sailing ships. So a passion for the ocean, yeah, that's us. So as a kid growing up in New Zealand, I dreamed about square riggers. And I've been lucky that I had 3 occasions on the US Coast Guard Bark Eagle. It's a photo I took off the east coast of the States. So the connection to the ocean via sailing vessels, which has just been my life. And my father wasn't a sailor. I don't know how the hell it happened. Grew up in New Zealand, I think you have a good chance of being near the water. But certainly the square rig crossing the ocean, discovering the world under sail was a huge attraction to me. And not many of you know someone that owns a sailing ship. Mary, for God's sake, owns a sailing ship, the Kaisei. Okay, Mary, would you talk? Is Kaisei at the top of the picture up here?
Right. Okay, I'll say a few things. Ron and I, one of the many things we share, besides having both done lots of sailing on the Amazing Spirit without an engine or without ever using engines on it, is we both sailed on square rigged ships. And so Ron had these great experiences on the Eagle. The other square rigged ship that we buzzed by in the photos was a vessel called Statsraad Lemkool. And actually, when I was out, well, that was it right there, yeah. When I was out in Tahiti, actually, I was going to deliver a boat back from Tahiti, from the Tahiti race that Ron and the Kiskadens were in. And I spent quite a bit of time hanging out with all of them in Tahiti. And I met this fellow who was involved with Outward Bound. And he'd been hired to be a teacher on board the Statsraad Lemkool, which I think is one of the most beautiful square riggers in the world. And somehow I ended up being asked to go on board as a teacher as well. So I spent 9 months on this sailing ship. And a funny story is that the teachers, we started from Bergen, Norway, and the boat had always had all hammocks for everybody. But they were building in cabins for the teachers, and the teachers were kind of upset because their cabins weren't big enough. And so I found it kind of weird. And so I said, look, I'm really used to sailing ships. I mean, if you've been sailing on Spirit, you know that you can have a lot of fun in very little space. And so I said, I'll give up my cabin. And so they took my cabin away and divided it amongst the other teachers. I said, I can go in one of the 6-bunk cabins with the students. And so they put me in there, and the captain of the boat was very upset that I didn't have my own cabin. And so by giving away my cabin, I ended up with the owner's cabin, back with all the officers for the 9 months I was on board. So that's a nice story about the way the world should be. But anyway, we can keep going. But Ron and I both share such a passion for the ocean, and I know all of you do too. I think we're just so lucky to have the experiences we've had and continue to have. So we can keep going. Voyages Institute, I started in 1979, and as you might imagine from my time on Stutzrad Lemcool, we did lots of sail training around the world on square riggers. We did it on smaller vessels. And so that brought us up to about 2009, where I began really hearing and seeing about these plastics all over the ocean. You know, I'd be sailing in the Tuamotus, and you'd come to uninhabited islands with their beaches filled with plastic. And people would call me up from their boats and tell me what they'd seen and what they'd experienced. And so we sailed Kaisei out for a month-long trip. And because we felt we had to see what was out there to try to figure out the best ways to clean it up. And we also, that earlier shot showing the 2 ships, that was kind of out in the middle of the gyre, the Kaisei and New Horizon, which was a Scripps student vessel, because we did lots of science out there. When we were trying to raise money to do this first trip to the gyre, people were saying, this is an urban myth. Do you even know this really existed? So we wanted to get it well documented, and we really did. That was when everybody really knew this was for real, and word spread all over the world. When I remember getting back, and there was a day that I was on 4 different BBC radio shows. Everybody wanted to talk to somebody who experienced this plastic gyre. Then we went out and we did a second trip in 2010, and we started a think tank of naval architects and marine engineers and fishermen and oceanographers, so we could study the information from the first couple of trips and try to figure out the best ways to clean up. And then we did another expedition focused on the tsunami debris, which was heading towards our coast here. And then we proceeded to do different small cleanups and research and development. And from our time in the gyre, we really saw the way the ocean sorts things. You know, you'll see 5,000 big white laundry detergent bottles, or you'll see a lot of beer and soft drink crates. And it doesn't do this quickly, but over the years, like things sort together. And so that's where the idea of, if we tag nets, you know, boats crossing, smaller boats can't possibly pick up the nets, but they can tag them with our GPS satellite trackers. And that allows us to both, on the great shot that Ron showed, to follow them in real time. So when we have a large cleanup vessel going out there, they can get right to them. But our oceanographer colleagues can have information about how they really move, and it helps their current predictions and their predictions of where the heavier debris distribution is. So we can go along. So that brings us to 2019, and we've been so lucky because we have been using a great sailing cargo ship, which means, you know, we love it because we're sailors, but it also has an incredibly low carbon footprint. And it comes with a crew. The crew on board were mainly from Kiribati and Christmas Island and Hawaii, and a few Americans, a few Europeans. But the crew was all very experienced at being an inter-island cargo schooner and lifting things on and off. And so you can see in the picture up on the right, you can see one of the satellite trackers, but you see people in the water. So, I mean, we use a cargo boom to lift out the nets, but sometimes the nets are too big and the crew will go in and put straps that we have attached to pulleys. So we may have things being raised at several points. And so we only went out for 25 days because that was all the money we had in 2019.
So we need to wake up and understand that this was calculated.
No, look how we all go. Mary's been switched off accidentally.
Mary, you were muted. Mary, you're on mute.
No, because you're
Mary, unmute yourself.
Yeah,
No,
we're
I'm
fine.
not-
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know how much you missed, but I'll keep going. So we brought in 84,000 pounds of plastic. And on the right-hand side, you see an example of one of the nets we brought in. And it was quite amazing to be there in Hawaii, seeing all these huge nets being unloaded. And it felt really, really good to think of all the lives of fish and whales and sea turtles that we saved. That same year, people asked us to do a cleanup because there were big nets that had been on reefs in Kaneohe Bay, and nobody'd been able to handle them. And so we were able to remove them by people getting in the water and carefully removing them from the reefs, and then tow them towards our vessel that could lift them out of the water. So this last year, 2020, we set a new world record, removing 340,000 pounds of plastic. And we were so excited by that, we made the commitment to head for removing 1 million pounds of plastic this year, 3 times what we did last year. So we can keep going. So you can get a sense, just one of the young men on board did all sorts of neat photography showing the nets in the water and our ship getting ready to remove them. And just from looking at the shot on deck, you have a sense of the profusion of debris that's out there. So we can keep going. In our ideas to scale up this year, we hope to be using 3 vessels and thus 3 times the amount of plastic. Our goal is 3 vessels, each of them out there for 100 days. The vessel on the left is the Kauai, which we've used for the last 2 years. The vessel on the right is called Aleutian Express, and it will be coming from the Seattle area. And then the other vessel is called the Lana Rose, and it's owned by a fellow that's become a good friend of mine. He flew out for one of the lectures in Hawaii when we got back from our cleanup, and his vessel, having that helicopter deck, which we certainly won't be using for a helicopter, but we'll be able to fly larger and more interesting drones off of it and land them back on it. So it should really increase our capabilities there. And this vessel can also tow a barge. And so, and have us have lots of interesting cleanup equipment on board, and it should really increase our capabilities. So it has us in a situation with the barge where, depending on, the gyre area is always having the plastics move around it, and the densest areas move. And so the 2 smaller ships may well go back to Hawaii or the coast to unload, or if they're close to Lana Rose, they'll go and unload into the barge, so they'll be able to just keep going. So she'll be out there able to be out there for the whole time period. So I say some of this a little bit in the iffy, because we're still in the process of raising the money for the 3 vessels, and going up to £1 million is a big step, but it's the sort of step that the ocean needs, and we're going to continue to keep making big steps. So we can move on. And so I always want to remember to say the real secret to the success of our ocean cleanup is really having a great crew of people on board the ships. I mean, ocean cleanup is really hard work, but it's also really joyful work. I mean, people that care about the ocean really know the importance of it. The island guys are such, I mean, I see the way they work, and it's just incredible. They're so happy and grateful to be doing something to help the ocean, and they just go at it with all their strength and humor and hardworking ethic. So we can go on. And I realize I put this slide in just to, show again the diversity of what's out there. But, sometimes because I presume everybody understands it, and I'm sure all of you do, but these plastics in the ocean really take a terrible toll on our ocean. They are polluting the water. They're killing all sorts of fish and marine life. And, you know, the ocean produces 2 out of 3 breaths that we take. And having all this plastic pollution certainly is something that's not healthy for any of us. So you can go on. I'm going to let Ron talk about this slide because he came up with like an iceberg, and he's really right. Ron?
Yeah, I think that's the iceberg thing was, I was fortunate 2 years ago to go to the Arctic, way north of the Arctic Circle, surrounded by icebergs. And because we know, you just say it, icebergs are mostly underwater, but until you actually see it, you can't get it by just a verbal thing. This shows, you see, there would be like inches of this thing showing above the water, and underneath it's like this. And as Mary's describing, grabbing a hold of this and actually getting the thing onto the deck, that's tricky. Yeah, well, Mary, you were out there with them, so this is important.
Yes, yes. Yeah, no, it's the ghost nets just keep fishing and fishing and killing, just terrible. So we can move on. This was one of the things we found last year that was quite heartbreaking, showing a poor turtle that got captured in one net, and then that net got captured in others. And so it's really just so striking to see what happens to sea life in these nets. And we can keep going. So people are always asking, you know, what we do with these nets. And our commitment is that none of them are going to go into landfill, and none of them are going to end up back in the ocean. And so I'm going to go through this very quickly to get to your questions, but we worked last year with Bifusion, which turns plastic to insulation boards and construction materials. We worked with Resynergy that turns plastic to fuel. We worked with a company in Czechoslovakia that turns plastic into metal supplies. We worked with H-Power or Hawaii Power that turns plastic into clean energy. And then, do you want to move on? Then BraceNet is a company in Germany, and they make bracelets and necklaces, keychains, dog leashes. They're sort of interesting because they just, you know, clean up the nets and repurpose them. And then we've given nets to lots of artists to do educational sculptures and paintings, calling people's attention to the issues of plastic. And there's a group at the University of Hawaii that we've given some materials to that are called the University of Hawaii Climate Action Artist. And then we can go on. And we are looking this year at working with people building roads. And there's ways that by putting plastics in, the roads can last longer. We're looking at things like seats. You know, we're always trying to be open to new uses and figure out what's the best. In some of these uses, we do get some money for them. People are always saying, you want to get that circular economy going. But of course, the big value of removing plastics from the ocean is creating a healthier ocean for all the creatures and healthier air for all of us. So we are working at making sure we investigate and come up with the best ways to recycle and repurpose. So next. So as we're sailing into our future, we're looking at all sorts of things. There's not as many sailing cargo ships out there today as I would like, though there's a flurry of new vessels. Many of you probably will have seen, like Michelin Tires is now going to be shipping tires from Europe to the US. And so, there's new vessels, and as we intend to scale up to different parts of the world, etc., we, do think, and I'll be brainstorming with Ron about it, about building a few of our own purpose-built, very simple kind of spirit, sort of simplicity vessels that with cargo holds that could do a good job. And we also have companies all over the place coming to us saying, will you help us recycle our plastics? And so we've taken on a few jobs where we'll actually help with transporting plastics to get recycled so they don't end up in landfill or the ocean. And so the next two slides we can do, people ask us where our funding comes from, and it comes from many of you watching, from Ron Holland Design, Crowley's Yacht, different family foundations, community foundations, ocean foundations. And so we appreciate everyone that helps us. And then I think the next slide is showing you how to contact us and different forms of social media we're on. But I think that's posted in the chat box for you as well. And we have a short video we could put on and show. And right after that, Ron and I are ready for questions.
Stop the share. You keep going, I'll get the other. I'll go get the video. Grab that. One moment. I just have to cue that up.
If it'll take a minute, we could take a question.
Before we take questions, I want to ask everybody to just stay on mute so it's not chaotic, and just text me your name and I'll call on you. And that way we'll go one person at a time without everybody speaking at once.
Hang on,
So if you just
try and
hit the chat button and say your name, but type it in there and we'll unmute you.
Yep. No, you're fine.
Mary, I think everybody's waiting for the movie.
There we go. Sorry.
There we go.
As smooth as we want.
48 days at sea, where they've brought in a record-setting cargo of ghost nets, derelict fishing gear, and consumer plastics. So they've been removing lots of toxic elements from the ocean.
I'm an avid surfer, waterman, diver on Maui, and I really wasn't aware of the scope of this giant problem. It was really frightening, actually, how much plastic was out there. When you'd look off the boat, it would just be clouds of tiny pieces smaller than your fingernail. And then consumer plastics, marine debris, ghost nets from fishing gear. And then when we would dive on the nets, we'd find turtles, fish, giant tuna, they're all dead, stuck in the net. So it was really disheartening. But the work that Mary Crowley and Ocean Voyages Institute is doing to go out there and actually collect these nets, helping to solve the problem, it's a monumental problem. You realize that when you're out there, because there's plastic everywhere.
It's not easy to find and pick up all this garbage. We use some new technologies like GPS, satellite trackers.
The ship left from Hilo, Hawaii on May 4th, and here it is now returning to Honolulu with over 100 tons of plastic collected from the big garbage patch of the Pacific Ocean. There's so much plastic there to be collected, and so much work to do, that this is just the start. What you see on the ship there, that's just what's on deck. That's a cargo hold is completely full of nets.
It's an honor to have all of these toxic materials out of the ocean. They'll be recycled and repurposed. Nothing will end up in landfill. Nothing will ever go back in the ocean. The ocean is a source of health for us as a planet and for us as human beings, and that we have to take care of it, and we have to have a healthy habitat for ocean creatures. And to do this, we have to change some habits, we have to have much better waste management, and we have to right now be doing lots of ocean cleanup.
Excellent. And you know, Mary, I wanted to say, I think everybody here is familiar with that young man who raised all of this money, put together that like pontoon thing that he dragged out to sea to try to get stuff. And what ended up happening is nothing in comparison to what you guys are doing. And I wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess we're open for questions. Does anybody want to ask a question? Okay, let's try it this way. Unmute yourselves. Go ahead and talk.
Anna, I see you're talking, but you're muted.
I just had one question, and I think that really preventing plastics going into the ocean is one of the key features that we have to think about as a society. And how do we educate, and how do we prevent more trash accumulating in the ocean?
Yes, that's a very good question. But you know what we're experiencing is the more we're able to clean up and publicize what we're doing. As I said, we have several companies coming to us that have big amounts of plastic that they don't know what to do with. And they're coming to us to help with those solutions. And I feel that, you know, one of the big problems is plastic is so cheap. It's not really viable business to recycle it in many places and in many ways. And I think that just needs to change. I mean, in Europe, they do a lot of things where they have, you know, when you buy a car, you pay for the cost of recycling the car at its end of life. And I think that people manufacturing plastics need to pay for their recycling and repurposing has to become much more viable. But I think we do it by, we're looking at different methods, and we are going to try to set up some small recycling areas in different island groups to provide jobs for people and to have recycling right there. And, you know, I don't know, all, you know, throughout the US, there's lots of places where everything is separated, but then plastic gets thrown in with everything else. So the US is not very good on recycling, repurposing. So we probably all have lots of things we can do here And, you know, there's lots to be done all over the world. I mean, the leading countries are in Scandinavia and Germany. So, I mean, one doesn't need to necessarily invent new things. There's lots of good practices to follow.
Mary, you have a question from Lawson Owen for Mary. There's a question for Mary. Go ahead, Lawson.
Hello, Mary. How are you? Thank you so much for the presentation, and Ron, it's a pleasure. I guess I'm following that point. I'm impressed by the photos and the extraordinary percentage of ghost nets. And I don't know if you guys have done the math of, of this many tons, it's ghost nets, but is there any responsibility on the side of the manufacturers on ghost nets or fishermen or anything of that nature? Because that does seem to be the largest portion of what you're collecting.
Yes, and part of why that's the largest portion is that that's what we've mainly been going after. But we do pick up consumer debris when we encounter them, but we will have some expeditions that are more targeted towards consumer debris. And, NOAA sets up containers in Hawaii and in Rhode Island. So fishermen can pick up nets and put those in the containers and they can get recycled. But, not much has been happening beyond that.
Thank you.
Can I jump in for a second here?
Go ahead, Charles. Yeah.
First of all, for those of you that were late on there, I'm Charles Hambleton. I work with Mary. I'm a filmmaker, lifelong sailor, diver, ocean advocate. I was a sailmaster on Pirates of the Caribbean on 4 of those movies and a bunch of Marine Department gigs. And then a bunch of documentaries about the BP oil spill and one called The Cove, which we won an Academy Award about saving dolphins in Japan.
Charles is actually going to be one of our speakers coming up.
And so a bunch of movies, but I really love working with Mary. And what the latest movie I'm in pre-production for is in the Philippines, and it's a whole different adventure. But we're also dealing with the plastics issue there, and what to do with it, and looking for other options of whether to turn it into biodiesel, kerosene, or building materials, R60 insulation and things like that. But where I'm going with that is, and I want Mary to expound on this, is even in the last few days, it's been very exciting. The satellite group that she's put together, that she's working with, which is, the International Space Station, NOAA, NASA, and a bunch of others that have been recently been able to differentiate between seawater and plastic from satellite without the trackers. So this is all evolving. And Mary, can you talk about that group at all? Because it's sort of where this is all going and opens up a whole new realm.
Yes, it's been exciting. I mean, last year, I had talks every week for months with this satellite group because they were so excited, because the fact that we had nets tagged in the ocean meant that they had targets, that they knew where plastic was. And so they were trying to figure out what plastic looked like in the ocean, what signatures it had. And I learned a lot about satellites in the process. And of course, you need to, satellites, when you're talking about the ocean, their range is relatively narrow. And you also need to have the right weather all the way from where the satellites are to the ocean to get the right shots. If there are clouds, you don't. And so we only really had one breakthrough last year, and it was a breakthrough where I really pushed the scientist. He said, there's all these things and I just don't know what they are. And I said, well, use your instincts, which is not what you say to a scientist too often, but use your instincts. Pick out the 4 that look the most interesting to you. And we'll figure out where they've gone since you spotted them. We'll send the boat there. And it turned out to lead the boat to an area of pretty dense distribution. And Charles was on a call today, and a graduate student of one of the lady satellite scientists from Britain was making some new discoveries about plastics from looking at the images. So yes, we're trying to figure out how to find plastic every possible way we can. And it seems like this year that it's maybe that satellites will really be able to be a help to us in the expeditions.
It's Dr. Lauren Burnman, and that she had a paper in the journal Nature, and about it, I think she's in either Glasgow or Edinburgh, and sort of did that, differentiated between some plastic and seawater coastally there. So one of her grad students just yesterday morning, or was it this morning, literally she turned him loose with a multispectral camera and a bunch of plastic and seawater in the lab, and just said, well, I'm just going to overlay these against the Worldview and Sentinel different satellite systems and see what it looks like. And it lined up. And so we had 15 scientists on the call, and Dr. Barry Rock at the University of New Hampshire, who's very involved with the International Space Station. And I've never seen such a group of excited scientists, and just one of the grad students almost stumbled across this. So it is very exciting to be able to use this technology and be able to track this stuff. And they have, for what my other project, I'll be able to look very closely at Manila Bay, which is one of the hot spots in the world for plastic, and a lot of the rivers. So it's exciting where it's going, where all this technology is going.
And Mary, your tracking systems, I'm thinking, there's a lot of sailors in the club that do the Pacific Cup, and, I mean, that's a perfect time to take a tracker, isn't it? In case they come across a bit of a net, and they can mark it, drop it overboard. And I think it would take 10 minutes off your time. We might work with the judges to give you credit there.
That's actually an idea Charles and I were talking about with Transpac or Pacific Cup.
Or both.
It'd be great if the organizers would give boats credit, because it does take, you really have to do a good job using the carabiner to attach it properly to the net. So, it does slow down the boat's effort in the race. So people have always done more tagging on the way back, but doing tagging on the way over and having the race give people credit for that would be the best way to do it. Because unfortunately, as we've all read the stories, the boats do run into literally nets out there that slow them down and cause them problems. So that would be a wonderful thing. And we're always looking for vessels of opportunity crossing. So Ron, would you like to take say a few more words? I mean, I'm so honored that you understand and care and believe so much in that.
Thanks, Mary. And what I'm thinking now is this has to be attacked for all directions. So one important direction is get the stuff identified and get it out of the water. The second important thing is this has to be, and first of all, I want to say, we can solve this.
Yes.
Remember 100 years ago, people said, we're never going to fly. Hey, if we can fly we can solve this plastic thing. And this plastic thing needs solving in the manufacturing aspect. So we shouldn't be making plastic. We should be making biodegradable straws, not plastic straws. I wonder if we were all canvassed, would you pay a penny extra for every straw you used? Yes, no problem. I think it would solve the problem. So, you have to attach a financial incentive. You have to get bright people with the desire to solve this, and you have to make a commercial initiative to solve this. You put those two together, we're not going to put plastic in the ocean anymore. The plastic straw will be friendly for the birds. So you have to, as we're doing, I think it's a shotgun approach. You have to hit it in every direction with every possibility to change plastic use on the earth. And it can happen. No doubt it can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Ron. Thank you, Mary. Thank you both for coming tonight. This has been great. And I hope, everybody wrote down the websites that Mary gave you. If not, I think it's in the chat someplace, and you can always email me and I'll send it to you. I think it's something, maybe we can get involved in as a yacht club even. But other than that, even on a personal level, there's places to donate, and we can do something. We don't have to sit by and feel like there's nothing, we're helpless. Right, Ron? So
this is a solvable human thing.
Yeah.
We can make the ocean cleaner.
Yeah.
Could take more than a year or two, but we can do it.
Okay, so if you, I just got a thing from Alex, and he says, if you click the three dots to the lower right next to the file under the chat, you can save it. You can save it all to your computer just like that. So you'll have the websites right there. So I just want to say thank you again to everybody for coming tonight. This was great. I think I learned a lot. I hope you did too. And yeah, well, maybe we'll check back in next year, Mary, see how things went this year.
Yes, oh, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Mo. And I saw many friends flash by on the screen. I never know, but I'm so happy to see so many people I know and value watching. And thank you all for your time. And thank you, Ron, for sharing with me. I know many people at the San Francisco Yacht Club are like at most yacht clubs. You have many great admirers. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Don. And thank
Good
you,
night.
Ron.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye, Rod.
Oceanvoyagesinstitute.org.
Got it.